The Power Broker is a profile of Robert Moses and his influence on New York and the rest of the world. It was written in 1974 by Robert Caro. It's 1,162 pages long and it weighs 2 kilograms. Robert Moses is regarded as the most powerful and influential person in the history of the New York state and city. His influence was felt all around the world. We're in fact feeling it even today, and he was never elected. In this book, you will learn about Moses' life, the lives of anyone around him, of any of the politicians that he manipulated or influenced to achieve his goals, the people who tried to stop him, and ultimately the people whose lives were destroyed by him. Before you comment, yes, I know there's a Kindle version, but I'm kind of old school. I love reading physical books. It allows me to unplug from technology. In fact, I unplugged and deleted all my social media apps in the month it took me to read this book. I read this book in a month. I had to go to a foreign country where I didn't speak the language, and I sat there and read it, but I got it read in a month. This book had its own backpack. I carried it everywhere, and I sat on a beach reading it obsessively to finish it in a month. At 2 kilograms, I had to factor this book into my luggage. I'm glad I read the physical copy because it allowed me to track my progress as I went along and actually quite literally feel the weight of the subject and the amount of work that went into this book. Robert Caro researched for 7 years to write this book. He eventually won the Pulitzer Prize for it, and people are calling it one of the greatest nonfiction books of the 20th century. So the least I could do was carry around this book and actually read it. I first heard of this book from Babin of Shifter in his annual gift guide. I ordered it, started reading it before my trip. By about the 200th page, I was convinced I had to bring this book with me as I traveled to Brazil. Only after I started reading this book did I learn that the podcast 99% Invisible has started a year-long book club on the Power Broker. This video is dropping just after the first episode of that podcast book club, where the author Robert Caro was a guest himself. When you're reading a book this big, reading it is like a journey, and everyone's journey will be different, and like a real journey, it'll have its ups and downs. There were points in this book where I was starting to wane a little bit. I felt a little exhausted by the level of detail. But in a testament of how well the book is written, and of course how well it's edited, just when you started to falter in your focus, Caro changes the story, it changes the focus, and you're suddenly re-engaged. And one of those moments happens at page 850, when specifically the chapters 1 mile and 1 mile afterward come along. Those 2 chapters do a great job of humanizing the kind of communities that were destroyed by Robert Moses in his quest to become the master builder of the world. And suddenly it brings in the previous 800 pages in real focus on just how many lives this one man has influenced over the 40 years that he had ultimate power. So why is a book written in 1974 about a guy who was in power till 1968 relevant in 2024? In this post-pandemic world, as we look hard at the way we live in cities and how we'd like to live in cities, it's helpful to look back at the legacy of Robert Moses and how he actually influenced urban planning throughout New York and ultimately North America and the rest of the world. So even though I live in a car-centric city in the middle of Canada, I can't help but read this book and understand some of the decisions that were made in my own community and how Robert Moses influenced them, and ultimately try and figure out how we can undo some of them and make a city more livable in 2024. So, who should read this book? I think urbanists should read this book. It's on every urbanist top 10 list of books you must read. If you're fascinated with the history of New York City, definitely have to read it. If you're a political watcher and you want to learn about the machinations of politics, this is definitely one of the books you have to read. I'm kind of glad I didn't have social media while I read this book. Otherwise, I probably would have fallen down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos that are focusing on Robert Caro. You can't read this book without having an appreciation for the author himself. The amount of dedication and work, the 7 years of his life that he put into this book, it's amazing. It speaks to a different time when artists or creative people would dedicate their whole life to one singular task. People barely want to watch a 7-minute video, let alone research a book for 7 years. I've watched numerous videos about Caro himself, and I'll put a few in the description. There's a really great biography of Caro and his wife and how they made this book happen. It's utterly fascinating. It's so well written. I think I'll probably read his other series on Lyndon Johnson based on the quality of writing in this book.